Hello. So Manny gave you the high, sales pitch. I'm going to go more into the weeds. And what I'm going to talk about is the regulation crowdfunding, which was what he was talking about, was what was adopted by the SEC in October of 2015 and became effective in May of 2016. But before I get started on the crowdfunding that's from the SEC, what was the world like before the crowdfunding exemption came about? The SEC has several types of an exemption. Basically what we're looking at when we're looking at SEC, the legal framework is what is the framework by which you can make an offering and what are your limitations? Before equity regulation crowdfunding came about, there was some very limited rules by which you could raise money. It was through the traditional ways. You couldn't use general solicitation. You couldn't go out and talk to, put an advertisement. You couldn't put it on the internet to try to raise money. It was all really regulated. And then over time, the market has moved so that there are ways in which they've dealt with the existing rules and put it into the new world of the internet. By, you have the angel list groups which have tried to vet the people that are potential investors. Basically, the old rules is that you could only sell to accredited investors, and in the general sense. And the internet portals that were available would do the back end work for you. They would make sure everybody that was potential investors were accredited investors, and then you would be able to access the portal that way, and then they could match it. But they were limiting it so that there was only those people who had already been pre-vetted could come onto the site. So what the regulation crowdfunding has done, as Manny had said, it was adopted. The rule was created in the Jobs Act of 2012, and it created a new exemption that was available. And this is to try to provide limited amount of availability of funds through the internet that was not previously available under the existing rules. And I won't go through these rules because we're going to go through them pretty heavily, but it's limited to raising up to $100 million. That number's been increased based upon inflation. I think it's $170,000 now, but $1,070,000. But those numbers increase over time based upon inflation. And it also limits the types of people that can make the investment into your company. It's limited to, and it's based upon their net worth and net income. And so people can, so it's putting a cap on the amount of money that people can invest in through this particular exemption in a particular year based upon their net income and or net worth. And it also, as Benny was talking about, it's required to go through a funding portal or another intermediary through a broker-dealer or something. So the SEC adopted the rules, as I said, in October, and it became effective last year. The key components of what the regulation crowdfunding deals with is it describes the types of companies that can rely upon this exemption. It limits how much, it states how much the companies can raise. It states what kind of information you're required to provide to potential investors. And it specifies the types of investors and how much they can invest. And it states how the offering has to be conducted. These are the companies, so the types of companies that can use this particular exemption are companies that are, and this is in the negative, who are not reporting companies. That means that are companies that are not public companies in the general sense. So public companies can't use this. Non-US companies cannot use this. Investment companies, so if you're trying to raise money to have that money as a pool to be able to invest in other companies, that's not available under this site. And companies that has no specific purpose that's specified in it. So if you're just trying to put up something that says, I want money, you're not going to get it, you can't use it. They had to put that in the rules, so I guess people really were trying to do this. And then there are ways that you can lose the right to be able to rely upon this exemption. So if you fail to meet, I mean, and we'll talk about the ongoing reporting requirements in a few minutes, but if you fail to meet your reporting requirements during the past 2 years, you can't go through this particular exemption again. And if you become a disqualified company, which means any of your officers, I mean, they're specified in there, the types of things that become disqualified. It's certain crimes any of your officers, directors, key shareholders would do. You know, if you're subject to securities fraud claims, those types of things, there are limitations on the type of bad actor types of things. If you fall within those categories, you can't rely upon this exemption. So, how much can you raise from this? This is the $1 million. It is capped. I mean, this $1 million in any 12-month period of time. But that $1 million includes any affiliates that are raising money. So, like for instance, if you're trying to raise money to buy real estate property, and you are doing different projects along the way, but there's one person that's controlling all that fundraising for those various different projects. You aggregate all of the money that's being used from this particular exemption from all the people who are under common control, even if they're for different projects, to see whether or not you can meet that category. So there are some limitations in that. It includes capital raised. So if you previously raised money under this particular exemption, like if you know, as Gary had said, that if you stage it, you raise $50,000 this year, and then you create another campaign within 12 months. That $50,000 or whatever money you raise is going to be included in the cap that you can. So it's within any 12-month period. What's good about what is not included is if you raise money from any other exemption. So if you did raise money from a Reg D offering where you raised it from only accredited investors or some other exemption that was available, then that's not included in the 12 months. So you can have concurrent offerings. So you can go out to people who are accredited investors through a traditional methodology, and then you could go to try to raise money from non-accredited investors through the regulation of crowdfunding. But there are some issues that that you have to be concerned about if you're going through an offering that is concurrent with each other, is because under the Reg D offering that most people use, which is 506B, which has a prohibition on general solicitation, is meaning that you can't go out and talk to people, you can't put it on the internet, is that what you have to be careful that offering is not the investors are making those offering that investment solely from their connections and not from your advertisement that you're doing on the internet portal. So because this would be considered a general solicitation for offerings, and so you need to be careful that there's not overlap. If you're relying upon a Reg D, which does, and there's two types of in a 506 offering when you're trying to raise money from accredited investors. There's two paths that you can go. One is general solicitation. One, you can use general solicitation, but there's a lot of restrictions on what the companies, how the companies go, and you can only sell to accredited investors. And the company has the burden to go out and make sure that the investors are accredited investors. So there's specific things that the company needs to do to confirm that if you're using general solicitation, that the person that's buying your securities is accredited investors. And sometimes that might require that you have to have them prove to you that you meet the test of accredited investor, which is you have income of at least $200,000 by yourself, or $300,000 with your spouse, and/or you have at least $1 million of assets, excluding your home. And so you might have to go out and say, show me your tax returns, if it's someone that you don't really know, to make sure that they meet these tests. So a lot of people don't, because of that, most people still tend to go through the 506B, which is where there is a prohibition on general solicitation by raising this type of money, because you don't have to go through that burden of trying to get that information from potential investors. So in that context, you need to be careful, since it doesn't allow you to have general solicitation, that you don't have a problem with the general solicitation with respect to a regulation crowdfunding campaign. So what kind of information is required? As Manny said, you have to file a Form C, and basically a Form C is, he said it's 60 pages, but the form itself is relatively straightforward, but you have to provide a lot of detailed information. This is just a basic form. There is also a format that provides for a Q&A format where you can just ask, where it goes through the required disclosure requirements, and you have to go in and you have to put in the question and answers to satisfy the information. But generally you have to provide information about your officers, directors, and principal shareholders. You have to describe the business. You have to describe how you're going to use your proceeds. You have to, and then one of the main things is that you have to provide 2 years of financial information, or if your company's not been around for 2 years, financial statements through the incorporation or the organization of your company. The type of information that you have to provide in the financial statements is determinable by how much money you're raising. If you're raising less than or at $100,000, then you have to provide total income, taxable income, and taxes reflected on your income tax returns. You have to show your income tax return, and then you have to show financial statements which are certified by the CEO. Versus if you're raising between $100,000 and $500,000, you have to provide financial statements that have been reviewed by an independent accounting firm. So that is an additional cost. So if you go over that threshold, which I think is now $107,000, but I'll update the slides before they get printed on that exact amount. But there is a distinction between $100,000 and $101,000 in what your cost is in trying to raise the money. And then if you're trying to raise over $500,000, then your financial statements have to be audited by the accounting firm, unless your first offering. If this is your first offering under crowdfunding, then all you have to do is provide reviewed financial statements. However, if you're doing the stage thing where you're raising $50,000 now and then you're raising $100,000 later, guess what? You're into you've already done the crowdfunding once, and so you're going to have to come up with audited financial statements if you're going to go over the $500,000. If your company, yes?
In regular crowdfunding, sometimes you go over what you planned. You wanted $50,000 and you got $400,000, great. In this scenario, are the approved portals going to cap you and stop it and basically say you're not going to 101 because you supplied us Form C that only gets you to 100 even?
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that question.
As a registered funding portal, we make a percentage of what we raise. So we can not let you touch the money, but then we can work with you to get an amended Form C as well as a CPA letter.
Okay, got it. You can go over, but you have to update your paperwork to support it in order to get access to it. Got it. Thank you.
And it's interesting. I saw some data from the SEC that they presented what the first, through December 31, 2016, so the first 8 months of this, the average amount had been raised during that period of time was $107,000, and it was, I think there were 163 offerings in 2016 by 156 separate issuers. So there were 7 of them that had gone through multiple offerings. The average offering target was $100,000. Was $100,000, and almost all of them accepted subscriptions to $1 million. So all of them provided for that almost all of them provided that they would accept up to $1 million. Then, as Manny says, that you would have to go through an amendment to your Form C to include the required information in order to get over that amount. So, so the audited financial statement or the financial statement requirement is somewhat determinative of how much people are raising on the site because it depends on how much cost you have to go through. And financial statements are permitted to only be 18 months old. So if you have financial statements from December 31, 2016, it's good through 18 months. So those financial statements would be good through 2018, April 30th, 2018. After that date, you'd have to amend your Form C to include additional financial statements if your offering is still open at that point. So you have to file the Form C electronically through the EDGAR system, which the SEC has put together. And that requires you to get, you have to go through the process of getting codes from that. So you have to file there's some background to do that. So you have to file a Form ID in order to get the codes, and then you can file on EDGAR. You have to provide progress updates on meeting your targets amount within 5 days after reaching 50% and 100% of your target amounts. And these are filed on a Form CU updates. If your portal provides updates on your filing of your targets, then you don't have to provide the filing, but you still have to make sure it's there. And if you go over, if you offer oversubscription, then you have to file at the end of that, you have to file a final form which says how much you actually raised. So the form Regulation C is not over after you raise your money. There are ongoing disclosure requirements that companies who have filed under the regulation crowdfunding has. So you have to file file additional information with the SEC and post it on your websites annually. And this is basically updating the information that was on the original file. So you have an annual disclosure requirements, and it has to be made within 120 days of your year end. But you don't have to provide additional information related to your financial statements.
Chris, I have a question.
Sure.
And then Manny might have an answer on this too. That's a lot of stuff to remember. These regulation crowdfunding platforms, how much of this stuff do they help you with and remind you and give you guidelines on?
The answer, guys, if you guys just apply and get approved, that's what matters. The funding portal will take care of all the legal, CPA, paperwork, filing with the SEC, so you can focus on what you do best, which is calling your friends and get them to back you.
I know one platform that a client of mine was working with, they had for a certain price, they would help you with a lot more stuff than for the regular fee.
Oh, okay. That might very well be, especially if they have an economic interest in your company.
Yeah.
So how long do you have to make these disclosures? So you have to file it, and you get to stop once you become public, which is probably in a long drain for a lot of these companies. But you can stop after your first year if you have less than 300 shareholders. If you fought at least 3 years and you have total assets that don't exceed $10 million, and if someone repurchases all your shares. So basically, this is an ongoing requirement. If you meet these particular issues, you have to keep making these annual filings with respect to an offering that's exempt under this.
You keep saying shareholders. Is this only available to corporations or?
No. It's economic. It's holders of record. It could be LLCs. It could be other types of entities that are there. But according to the SEC's information that they've provided on this, about 70% of the companies out of this are. Sorry, the phone is ringing.
Is that your bat phone?
Yeah. So about 70% are corporations.
Do the shareholders gain any particular rights by virtue of you using this method?
No, this is just a method by which you can raise money. So it's like if you were go through a private placement. So it's the same issues that relate to any way you raise it. This is just one avenue for you to be able to raise it. I mean, the one thing that the shareholders do get is they have the right. I mean, you have to provide these annual updates on on your information, which is not required if you're going through a private placement.
So would you be able then to offer different classes of shares to the shareholders? Like
Yes.
non-voting shares?
Yes, you can, there's no restriction, I mean,
If you can convince them to do it.
yeah, so the SEC said that most of the offerings that occurred through the end of last year were mostly common and preferred stock, but there was also debt instruments that were involved and safe notes that were issued through that. So I mean, this is just the mechanism by which you can authorize to make those offerings, but it doesn't restrict anything else within what a normal offering might be able to provide.
So if I do get like 1,000 rideshare drivers to, invest, are they shareholders or,
Yeah.
but,
Well, it depends,
I mean, I wouldn't want them to have any kind, because what if a VC, like if Uber said, or Lyft said, no, we want to go ahead and acquire your company, I mean, would they have anything to say about that?
Most likely. I mean, as with any company, I mean, this is going back into corporate law. This isn't dealing with the regulation. But if you have shareholders, those shareholders have rights under the corporate statute or under your articles of bylaws. And so they are actual shareholders. And so in most cases, if a company is being sold, the statute requires that you have to get a majority consent of all your shareholders. And so you would have to go to them and ask them for their consent. And so there's other issues related around that particular issue that go about. But you would have to comply with ordinary corporate law related to the ownership of any interest in your company.
Well, I mean, so that's my question. Is there a different type of, structure that you can do with equity? Because that's the only part that I really don't understand.
Yeah, so that's a different topic. This is talking about the method by which you can raise equity. I mean, there's a variety of different types of equity out there that, and you should, you can talk to someone about that, right? I mean, I can talk to you briefly about it, but I don't want to necessarily veer into that particular issue on this call, on this meeting. All right, so, and then we talked about who can you raise the money from? And as we had talked about before, you can raise it from non-accredited investors or any type of investor from that regard, which is different from most exemptions that are available. But it's limited. So if someone has a limited, it's limited to if annual income or net worth of the investor is less than $107,000, the investor is limited to the greater of $2,200 or 5% of their lesser of their income or net worth. So, in essence, and the SEC had some examples about this, so I'll just read it from them. For instance, if an annual income of an investor was $30,000, its net worth was $105,000, then the investor could invest either the greater of $2,200 or 5% of $30,000 or $2,020. So that's as much as they can invest in an entire year over all the platform. I mean, all the investments in that year.
Let me ask you, I mean, you're not going to get into their financials, right? I mean, if they sign a piece of paper saying that they are an accredited investor, that's sufficient enough for you, correct?
Well, the portal is going to...
Well, let's say I'm not using a portal. Let's say I'm going out there and I'm reaching out to someone who says, hey, I've got $50,000. I ask them, are you an accredited investor? They say yes. They sign a piece of paper, I get the funds.
Yeah, so so you're talking about something other than the regulation crowdfunding.
Yes.
So if you're going out to someone else.
Yeah.
So as I was mentioning before, if you're going only to accredited investors and you're not using general solicitation,
okay,
you can rely upon statements from the investor as to their income and or net worth, unless you know otherwise.
Okay, makes sense.
Okay.
But you're not going to be held liable if they sign this paper saying, yes, I'm an accredited investor.
Right. I mean, but if you're using general solicitation,
Then yes.
you might have to go through and kind of
Makes
confirm.
sense, yeah.
So, Chris, just to clarify, you're talking about raising equity, and if you've done a prior equity raise of $50,000, that counts against you. But if you were using donation or rewards-based
Yeah,
crowdfunding, that doesn't count against you.
that's right.
right? And
This is just this equity, use it under this particular exemption. As we said, if there are other exemptions that may be available to you, you can use those concurrently with these. But if you're relying upon the regulation crowdfunding, these are the limitations that you have.
And if, I don't know whether you can comment on this or not, but within crowdfunding, I consider also Reg A Plus as a mechanism. That's how you get the $25 to $50 million investments. Can you just comment on Reg A Plus availability?
So Reg A Plus is you know, basically an IPO strip light. You're providing documentation with the regional office of the SEC, a specific form of information that you have. It wasn't in the Jobs Act. It was similarly expanded. It had been only limited to $5 million raised, and now it's the $50 million. But you know, there's bifurcation there as to what kind of financial statements you have to provide as well, depending on how much you're raising. But that's really a public offering of your securities, where you put together a prospectus, you file it with the SEC, local office, they approve it, and then you can go out trying to raise money through that mechanism. I really don't see that as a crowdfunding. I see that more as a public offering of securities through this particular exemption.
And it's really for mid-sized businesses, because the average cost to get started is about $100,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You don't do that as your first step, I understand.
Yeah. So anyway, just to go quickly, the spouses are allowed to calculate their net worth and annual income jointly. However, if you're using the spouses as part of your income, the spouse can't file this separately. So you can't have the exemption applied, so both spouses get to go under this exemption. If you're combining the income to meet the test, then only one spouse can. Only one amount can be done.
To clarify, before we talked about the different portals have to basically look at investors to make sure they're accredited and let those people in to have access to invest in these equity crowdfunding. But how do these guys fit in? They're not accredited.
Right.
Are they
So
on different portals?
The portals are doing the same thing here, confirming.
It's a different portal or the same portal?
Well, these are regulated portals. These are ones that, like Manny was talking about, have to be approved by FINRA. They go through an application process. There's maybe 20, 25 of them.
So these guys are on all the portals.
I'll get to that slide in a second. You either have to go through a registered portal, or you go through a broker-dealer in order to do this.
Oh, these guys can go through a different channel besides the portals that we saw earlier.
Right. I mean, the other portals are non-regulated portals, and those you're not relying upon this exemption in order to make those sales. Typically, you know, like AngelList and other people, which had opened up portals for accredited investors, they were relying upon 506B, which is Reg D, as an exemption, and they could raise unlimited amount of money that way. This is not. This is limited to the $1 million in these finite people, and the portals will go through the process of vetting the investors to make sure that they are meeting these particular tests.
Just to clarify, Manny, what you put up there on the websites, those were not the actual portals. Those were lists of where the portals can be listed. Is that correct?
My slides showing Angels List, Crowdfunder, Fundable, and EquityNet are not registered funding portals. Those
Right.
are, like Angels List is free to post because they do different services, like an investor can do a syndicate, or there's jobs. Crowdfunder, you pay a fee to be on there. They're not a registered funding portal. This is not for non-accredited investor. It's just a way to promote your private offering.
Right.
And all the sites are the same, and each one has auxiliary services. They can charge you money to try to get investors, but it's not a registered funding portal.
Right. Okay.
And this to answer that question, I mean, the offering has to be made through intermediaries, which is a registered broker-dealer or a funding portal, and there's restrictions on what the funding portal may not do. I'm not going into that because it's really not relevant to this. There are limited amounts of things that how you can communicate the offering to people. You can use what we call, you can't generally advertise the offering to people, but you can use what we call a tombstone, which is just basically saying, this is the offering, go to this portal, you know, all the information that you're required to provide is there. So you can do your social media in some respects to try to push people over to the portal, but it's very limited information that you can use to do that. So once someone buys the securities off your portal, these are just securities. They have resale restrictions. They are restricted securities. They have to hold the shares for at least 1 year before they sell it, except that they can sell it back to the company. They can sell it to an accredited investor, or if they're registered with the SEC, or to a family member. Other than that, you have to hold it for at least a year once the securities are held. So those are restrictions that an investor would have on that. Now, with respect to the company, you know, as I was talking about, there's several places where the companies are subject to reporting companies. And there's two ways in which you really kind of do that. One is you file registration, IPO, your S1, S3, whatever, to become a public company. The other one is that if you have over $10 million in assets and you have over 2,000 persons as shareholders, or 500 more that are non-accredited investors, then you have to voluntarily file to become a public company with the SEC. The one thing the Jobs Act did was it said that shareholders that you buy through crowdfunding exemption are not counted in that number. But the regulations came back and said that limitation is only good if you're current on your current reporting. So these are those annual reporting requirements that I talked about. If you don't have more than $25 million worth of assets, and you engage a transfer agent to reflect all your shares. So there's limitations to that carve out from that number. So if you're going out and you're raising, you know, get a lot of shareholders off this crowdfunding site, and you don't comply with this, you may be forced, and you end up with over $10 million worth of assets, you may be forced to become a public company. So that's just one of the things that, and the SEC grants a 2-year permission to make a full transition if you trigger that particular exemption. So I know that was through the weeds, and I was.
So it seems like there's obviously a lot of regulations if you're going to non-accredited investors with just raising funds. If you do go with just straight up accredited investors, how much of that do you still have to comply with? And
you don't have to comply with any of this.
Okay.
So like, if you're going to,
so like, let's say for example, I'm just going to go sell equity, and let's say you value a company at $10 million, you sell 10% of the company, and so you raise $1 million. And I talk to an accredited investor, and they say, hey, I'll cut you a check for $1 million, and here's the shares, and it's as easy as that, or not really?
Pretty much. I mean, if you're only raising money from accredited investors, you really have no disclosure requirement at all. So, you know, all this stuff that we talked about in terms of financial statements and all that other stuff, you don't have to put together. I mean, the one thing that still applies and will still govern your relationship with any investor is that you can't provide misleading information or omit to state facts which made prior statements misleading. Because and that's why you end up coming back to, if you're making a general talk to a bunch of different people, why you come back to having the formal document in place. So you have one document that shows what your communication was.
Sure.
But that said, there's no requirements for any disclosure requirements or anything if you're just going to accredited investors and you're using non-solicitation and
what if you're raising money from like family? Like, what sort of documentation do you have to have? Like, hey, grandma wants to meet you.
yeah, so there's a lot of exemptions available. I mean, not a lot, but there are several exemptions that are available from under securities laws. The one thing about crowdfunding regulation is that it preempts all state laws related to regulating this type of offer. So if you rely upon other types of exemptions, you have to comply with both federal law and the individual states where the issues are being offered. So like, for instance, the federal law permits you to offer up to $5 million to anybody with, you know, with general solicitation. But you need to comply with some exemption under state law to do that. And there are under California, there's very limited rules that says how you can do that. But one of them is that you would, yes, you could be able to raise it from grandma and grandpa and not comply with these particular rules or any particular rules, but you need to make sure that your offering complies with legal requirements and you need a lawyer to help you with that. Any other questions?
I just want to say one more thing. When I was doing my research today, I found a website that is actually a white labeled equity crowdfunding platform. I couldn't believe it.
And what do you mean by that?
Meaning that if you want to raise funds, you can just put your label on there, like, XYZ. I'll send it to you. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I can't respond to that.
Okay, it wasn't a question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much.